Okay. To all the life sciences learners from the Free State Province, good afternoon, guys. This is Mewesi Musile. I am the subject advisor from Motero District in the Free State Province. So you still remember that Motero Life Sciences, it is number 1 in the whole province, and also again, Motero Life Sciences, it is also number 1 in the whole country. So guys, today I'm going to do the exam tips with you for Life Sciences Paper 1, which will be written on this next coming Friday. So let us move straight into our presentation. So I will start first with the mark allocation per topic. So you still remember that out of that 150, and then we have 8 marks, which is allocated for reproduction in vertebrates, and then 41 marks will go to human reproduction, and then 54 out of 150 will be for responding for the environment, which is human nervous system, and then we have only 13 marks, which is allocated for responding to the environment, which is plant hormones. And then both endocrine system and homeostasis in humans, and then they both share 34 marks out of the total, which is 150. And then, please, guys, let us move now to the skills. And then under the skills, this is what we have. Remember that you have to be able to draw the line graph, bar graph, histogram, and pie chart. And please remember that when you draw your graphs, remember the caption. You must always start with the caption or the heading, and then please make sure that your caption or heading, it has 2 variables, which are dependent and independent variables. And then again, show the units, both on the X and the Y axis. And then the pie graph, please make sure that you don't make a mistake. Let us say that you get a question and then you are asked to draw a pie chart, and then you will start with the caption or the heading, and then after that just show your calculations and then you move to the drawing. Please make sure that you don't write your calculations on a separate page. And then another thing still on the skills under the graphs, the period asked for in the question must be added. For example, let us say that they ask you to draw a pie graph or a bar graph or line graph, which shows the gestation period and the disorders caused from maybe the period, it will be 28 weeks to 31. So just make sure that from your caption, you also show those weeks. Then we move to the drawings. When you draw, please remember that when you draw the tables together with the diagrams, you use a pencil when you draw, and then when you label, write in the heading or caption, and together with the data and the labels, just make sure that you use a pen. Now we are moving to another concept, which is the scientific investigative question. Please use the aim of the investigation as given in the question to determine the dependent and independent variables, which may not always be the same as the labels on a graph or table. And then let us say maybe you have been asked to identify the dependent and independent variable on that particular investigation that you will get. So just remember that most of the time, we get the dependent and independent variables where on the aim of the investigation or the scientific investigation statement. I'm going to give you examples here. I have 3 examples, and then the first one is as follows. An investigation was conducted to determine the effect of zinc supplementation on the levels of testosterone in the blood of weightlifting males. And then the factor that we are investigating in this investigation, it is the zinc supplements, effects of zinc supplementation on the levels of testosterone. And then let us say that they ask you to identify the dependent and independent variables from this investigation. We have 2 things which have been mentioned on this statement. It is the zinc supplement and the levels of testosterone in the blood of weightlifting males. And then there is no way that you will say that the zinc supplements, they depend on the testosterone. in the blood of the weightlifting males. But remember that there must be a relationship between these two variables, which are dependent and independent variables. Testosterone in the blood of weightlifting males, and then it will depend on what? On the zinc supplement. Maybe let us say that if levels of testosterone in the blood, they are high, and then maybe it will mean that the person is using the zinc supplement. And then the same way, if it is low, maybe the person is not using the zinc supplement. And then another example that I'm having here, it is as follows. A learner investigated the effects of the two plant growth substances, which are gibberellins and auxin, on apical dominance. Can we say that the plant growth substances, which are gibberellins and auxin, they depend on apical dominance? And there is no way that you will say that. Like as I have said that before, please, before you identify these variables, which are dependent and independent variables, just make sure that there is a relationship between the two. And then we know that you can only say that apical dominance, it depends on what? On the plant growth substances, and then in this case, which are gibberellins and auxin. And then the last example that we have here, it is as follows. An investigation was conducted to determine the effect of gravity on the direction of the growth of the root. And then the growth of the root will depend on what? Will depend on the effect of gravity. Not gravity will depend on the growth of the root. And that is all with dependent and independent variables. So please just make sure that you only look for these two variables where on the aim or the scientific investigation statement. And then make sure again that there is a relationship between the two variables. Then we move to reliability, repeating the investigation and increase the sample size. And then please remember that the sample, you have to mention the sample as given in the question. Then I will give you an example. I have two examples here. And then the first one is as follows. How can we improve reliability of the results of this investigation? And then you know that most of the time we always answer this question by saying that we repeat the investigation or increase the sample size. But remember that you also have to mention that sample. Rather by saying, instead of saying increase the sample size, and then you just have to mention the sample, maybe by saying that increase the number of dogs. If the experiment is based on the dogs, increase the number of beans, B-E-A-N-S. If that particular experiment is based on what? On the beans. And then the second example is as follows. State two ways in which reliability of the results was ensured for this investigation. And then how are you expected to respond to this question? And then you will answer by saying that the investigation, you will go through your investigation and then check if the investigation was repeated. And then if it was repeated, and then this is how you have to respond to that question. The investigation was repeated several times. Maybe it was repeated 5 times or 10 times. And then you will mention that, or the investigation was done or conducted over a period of 12 months or 2 weeks or 6 months. And then another thing which is very important with reliability, you still remember that one of increasing the sample size. Now you will say a large sample, and then please remember to mention the data. A large sample maybe of 60 healthy males was used, or a large sample of 15 beans, large sample of 10 boys or girls again was used. So now we move to validity. Validity, we keep the variables, and then also again you have to mention them constant or the same. Remember the same temperature, same size of plant, same type, same age, same. And then it has to do with what? With validity. And then I also have an example here. How can we improve validity of the results of the investigation? And then you'll just answer by saying, use the same type of beans, same size, same age, same environmental conditions, same method of recording, same or equal number of participants. So that is all with validity. Please remember that validity, all those variables that have to be the same or that are constant. And then we move to the control to compare the results. What is the aim of the control? It is to compare the results and to ensure that the results are due to the factor that is being tested or the difference between the experiment and the control. We know that with the control, you eliminate or you inhibit that factor that you are testing. But with the experiment, always you allow the factor that you test. And then after that, all these other variables, you have to keep them constant. They have to be the same. And then the last thing on the scientific investigation questions, it is the conclusion. So just make sure that your conclusion is based on the aim and the results. This is where you will be comparing the results and then together with what? With the aim. So now we move to interpreting of the graphs, extracts, case study, diagrams, and paragraphs. So just make sure that as soon as you get a paragraph or maybe a case study or an extract, just make sure that you read the heading and the content carefully and underline the key aspects to understand the theme of the question. Let us say maybe they give you a paragraph or a case study or an extract. As soon as you see that extract, so please just make sure that you underline the key aspects. And then again, what is important, you have to be able to interpret that, okay, maybe this extract, it is based on which content? Maybe it is from the human reproduction, or it is from homeostasis or endocrine system or nervous system. And then after that, you will be able to answer your questions. And then calculations, remember that there are always calculations on our papers, and then you must be able to do simple calculations. Pay attention to how to calculate the percentage increase and decrease. And then we move to the next item on our presentation. Answer what was asked. If a question asks, what will be the effect on A if B is removed, damaged, or injury? So please remember that you must explain the effect of the absence, damage, or injury according to its function. Do not explain the function of A and B. And then I also have an example here. And then it is example 1 of 2, and then it is as follows. Explain the consequences or effect if part A, according to this diagram that I'm having here. Part A, this diagram, it is based on the structure of the human ear. And then part A, according to our diagram, it refers to the auditory nerve. Do you still remember the function of the auditory nerve? Remember that it is to transmit the nerve impulse to where? To the part of the brain which is called the cerebrum for hearing. And then again, it transmits the nerve impulse to which part of the brain? To the cerebellum for balance. Now you have to explain, or now what will be the consequences, what will be the effect if this auditory nerve is damaged. And then in this case, please remember that you have to use the very same functions to answer these questions. Like as I have said that the auditory nerve, it transmits this impulse to the cerebrum for hearing. But now if it is damaged or injured, what will happen? So it means that the auditory nerve will not be able to transmit the impulse to the cerebrum. And then after that, you explain what will be the effect if the impulse is not transmitted to the cerebrum. Therefore, there will be no hearing, or no hearing will occur. And then again, you use the very, like as I said, that you use the very same functions when you respond to the questions which are based on damage, absence, or injury. And then again, another function of the auditory nerve, I have said that it is to transmit the impulse to the cerebellum, but now it is damaged or it is injured. And then you remember, okay, impulse will not be transmitted to the cerebellum. And then again, you continue to ask yourself a question. And then what will be the implications? What will happen now if there is no impulse that is being transmitted to the cerebellum? And then you continue. Therefore, balance will not be maintained. So please remember that this is how you respond to such questions, which are based on damage, injury, and absence. And then we move to example number 2, and then this one, it has to do with explain. Explain, please, learners, remember that it is a cause and effect question. And then I also have an example here. It is based on thermoregulation. It is as follows. The diagram below, it shows the structure involved in thermoregulation in the skin. And then we have a condition here. It is called anhydrosis. Anhydrosis is a condition or a disease which results in the sweat glands producing no sweat production with this condition. And then it can affect the whole body or the small part of the body. Anhydrosis may be caused, it is caused by the severe burns, radiation, infection, inflammation, or other injuries to the questions. Now we move to our question. Our question is as follows. Explain why anhydrosis affecting the whole body. Remember, we have said that I have mentioned that this condition or this disease, it results in what? In the sweat gland not producing sweat. Now you have to explain why this condition may lead to death when the person is exposed to very hot conditions for a few hours. And then like as I have said, that explain. Please remember that explain, it is a cause and effect. You first have to check on the marks. If that question, it is out of 3 marks or 4 marks, if it is out of 4 marks, and then it simply means that you will have to mention 4 points. So this is how you will start answering this question. Because the sweat glands are not producing the sweat. And then what is going to happen? There will be less cooling of the body. Or less evaporation. And then again you continue. Okay, if there is less cooling of the body or less evaporation, and then what will happen? There will be an increase in the body temperature or overheating. And then you continue again. If there is an increase in the body temperature or overheating, and then what will be the consequences? What will be the results of that? Then the enzymes will be denatured. And then you continue again. So now the enzymes are denatured. What will be the results? What will happen? All metabolic processes will stop. And if all metabolic processes stop, what will be the end result? And then the person will die. So please remember that this is how you have to explain or to answer the questions which are based on explain. Like as I have said that it is a cause and effect. And then you get, if you get a question, you have to explain first that this and this will happen. And then after that, you ask yourself, what will be the effect of this thing that will happen? So that is how you have to answer. And now we move to adaptations or structural suitabilities. And then remember with this, you have to mention a characteristic plus a function for questions which are based on structural suitabilities or adaptations. And then let me give you an example. I have one example here, but before I move to this example that I'm having on my presentation, let us say I want to describe the structural suitabilities or the adaptations of my legs. And then this is how I will go. I will say that I have long legs. Long legs, it is the description or characteristics of what? Of my legs. They are long. And then what is the advantage of these legs for being long? Now I explain. They enable me to walk or to run very fast. And then that is how you answer these questions which are based on structural suitabilities or adaptations. You mention a characteristic and a function. Long legs, and then the implications or the advantages of these long legs or of these legs for being long, and then they enable me to walk or to run very fast. And then let us go back to our presentation. I have an example here which is based on our syllabus, and then it is as follows. Explain the two ways in which the lens of the eye is structurally suited to perform its function. So this simply means the structural suitabilities or the adaptations of the lens of the eye. Remember, you have to describe the lens, okay? And then after that, you give the function. So this is how you will go about this one. The lens is elastic. It is elastic. It can stretch. And then, therefore, it can change its shape. It is elastic, and then to allow for accommodation. You still remember accommodation as one of the functions of the eye. Again. And then, again, it is also transparent. We know that the lens is transparent, and then to allow the light rays to pass through. And then, again, it is bioconvex to refract the light rays. So that is all with the adaptations or the structural suitabilities. So please just remember that when you respond to such questions, structural suitabilities, they can even ask you the structural suitabilities of the what? Of the sperm cell, the structural suitabilities of the pinna of the ear. Again. So you just have to mention the characteristic and the function. Now we are moving to our topics. Reproduction in vertebrates, like as I have said, that it will be out of 8 marks. So please remember the types of fertilization under reproduction in vertebrates. You remember we have external fertilization and internal fertilization. And then for external fertilization, there are things which are very important that you have to remember. Most of the time, all the organisms, they go through external fertilization. Remember that most of the time they produce large number of eggs. Why? It is because they are prone to predators. And then again, these eggs, they can also be washed away. And then internal fertilization, few gametes are formed, embryo is protected in the uterus, and then with ovovivipary, you know that the eggs are retained inside the female's body, and then for protection. And then again, still under reproduction in vertebrates, and then we have the types of development strategies. So please remember them. It is precocial and altricial development. Let us say they give you an extract, they give you a diagram. So please remember that you have to be able to interpret if that particular diagram, that particular extract, if it is based on precocial or altricial development, and also you must be able to support your answer. Types of reproduction or reproductive strategies, and now we are talking about ovipary, ovovivipary, and vivipary. So please just make sure that you revise them. And then the structure of the amniotic egg. Remember the structure, all the parts, the labels, which are stipulated on your examination guideline, and then you remember we are talking about the extra embryonic membranes here under the amniotic egg. So please know those extra embryonic membranes together with their functions. So now we move to another topic, which is human reproduction, and then which will be out of 41 marks. So please, guys, remember all the parts which are stipulated on your examination guideline together with the functions. Remember the treat lens. Most of the time I call this treat lens the SPC, seminal vesicle prostate gland corpus gland. Again. And then we also have the first difference, know the position, know the function. And then epididymis, testes, and then the scrotum, urethra, please. And then also the parts of the female reproductive system. Together with the functions, please, they are also important. Ovary, endometrium, cervix, fallopian tube, uterus, and the vagina. Now we move to frequently asked questions on the male reproductive system. And then you still remember we have those type of questions where you are asked to name the letter and the name of the part maybe which is responsible for what? Nourishment of the sperm cell, mobility of the sperm cell, secreting an alkaline fluid which neutralizes the acidity of the vagina, the part which is responsible for transporting urine and semen, the part which is responsible for depositing the sperm cells inside the female's vagina. And then again, the issue of the epididymis. And you also have to remember the functions of the epididymis and then the phase difference. What will happen if the phase difference is surgically cut or tied? Explain one reason why the male will not be able to reproduce if the phase difference has been tied. Or explain again why the man will still be capable of releasing the sperms, the what? Not the sperms, the semen, but without the sperms. And then explain what will happen to the male's ability to reproduce if the phase difference is permanently blocked. So those are the most frequently asked questions. And then again, the issue of the scrotum, you still remember it. And then I have one example here. The test results show that a man has a low sperm count. Explain why the doctor advised the man to not to put his laptop or the computer which radiates heat on his lap. Okay, and then another question, maybe it can be, explain why a man is advised not to wear tight underwear or the pants. And then you remember that if they wear tight underwear or pants, and then what will happen? The scrotum will be pulled towards the body, and then the testes will now be exposed to high body temperature. You still remember that the normal body temperature, it is 37 degrees Celsius, and then this will lead to abnormal sperms or less sperm production or no sperm production, and then which might lead to what? To infertility. And then another one, explain why is it necessary for the testes to be on the outside of the male body. And then please remember that it is because the temperature of the testes, you remember it must be 2 degrees Celsius below the body temperature. The body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. So this simply means that the temperature of the testes, it must be 35 degrees Celsius. So that is one of the reasons why they are hanging outside of the male bodies. And then after that, we have another frequently asked question here. And then it is as follows. State a reason why they will normally, it is common in older men for prostate to enlarge. You still remember the prostate gland from the accessory glands. And then state a reason why they will normally have trouble urinating. It is because that there will be a pressure built up around the urethra, and then the urethra will be closed off. And then you still remember that the function of the urethra, it is to transport what? The urine. I get urine together with the semen. And now if the prostate is enlarged, and then there will be that pressure built up on the urethra. And then now we move to frequently asked questions under the female reproductive system. And then please remember the functions of the ovaries, the place where fertilization takes place. You still remember it is the fallopian tubes, hormones which are responsible for the development of the endometrium. And then let us say again, if a tumor grows on the fallopian tube or tubes, results in a complete blockage. And then explain now, how is it going to affect pregnancy? How is it going to affect menstrual cycle? Explain if menstrual cycle will continue to be normal. So those are the frequently asked questions under the female reproductive system. Now we are moving to spermatogenesis and oogenesis. So guys, please remember that you are expected to describe or to write these two processes exactly the same way in which they have been described on your examination guideline. This simply means that you are not allowed to describe or to write these two processes by using your own words. Spermatogenesis straight from the examination guideline, please, and oogenesis. And we move to the structure of the gametes, the sperm and ovum. I know that you don't have a problem with the structure of the sperm, or maybe it is because you are the sperm that won. I don't know. But most of you, I know that you know the structure. together with the labels and the functions. And then also, you are also expected, even on your examination guideline, it has been stated that you must also know the structure of the ovum. And then frequently asked questions under the sperm cell. Remember the acrosome and its function. And then the neck, you remember that the neck, it consists of what? Of mitochondria. Mitochondria which contains what? The mitochondria, you still remember that it is responsible for providing the sperm cell with energy so that the sperm will be able to move very fast. And then again, another thing which is very important, the chromosome number in the nucleus of the sperm. And then you know that it is supposed to be haploid, which is 23. And the adaptations. You remember that I have talked about the adaptations of the sperm cell. And then the chromosome number again of the nucleus of the ovum. Very important. Now we move to the ovarian and the menstrual cycle. So please, guys, remember the functions of all the hormones which are involved in the menstrual cycle. We are talking about the FSH, LH, estrogen, and progesterone. The target organs of FSH, LH, estrogen, progesterone. And another thing which is very important, the negative feedback mechanism between progesterone and FSH. So please remember, go through the functions, go through the menstrual cycle. And then because if you don't understand the menstrual cycle, you know that you won't be able to answer any application question which will be based on the menstrual cycle. You still remember that on day 1 of menstrual cycle, the hormone FSH will be secreted again by the pituitary gland. And then after that, you ask yourself, what will be the function of this hormone? It will stimulate the development of the primary follicles into Graafian follicle. Now you are at the Graafian follicle. What will be the function of the Graafian follicle? It secretes the hormone estrogen. And then estrogen, you remember that it stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete LH. And then LH, which causes ovulation. And this LH, again, you remember it is responsible for turning the ruptured Graafian follicle into corpus luteum. The corpus luteum, which will secrete what? Progesterone, and then progesterone, which will thicken the lining of the endometrium further. And then if fertilization doesn't take place, you know that the corpus luteum, it will degenerate. And what will happen to the level of progesterone? It will now drop. The level of FSH, it will now rise. And then again, if fertilization takes place, corpus luteum, you still remember that it will remain up until the end of pregnancy. And then it will keep on secreting progesterone with the help of what? Of the placenta. That is very important. And then development of the zygote to a blastocyst or blastula. So please remember the order in the development of the structures. And then we are talking about the gametes, the ovum and the sperm cell. Fertilization will take place. Then we will have a diploid zygote and morula, blastula, and fetus. And then how are you expected to write or to describe this process in the examination? And then this is how you have to go about. After fertilization, zygote undergoes mitosis, not meiosis, or it divides by the process of mitosis. And some of you, I know that most of the time you will say that the zygote divides by what? Mitotically. Okay. And then to form a ball of cells called morula, and then morula divides by mitosis again to form a hollow ball of cells called blastula. Why a hollow ball? It is because of that empty space that you see there on the blastula. And then the blastula, it will form the outer layer called the chorion, which will form the finger-like projections called chorionic villi and for what? For implantation. And then other things which are very important under the development of the fetus during gestation period. Please remember the functions of the chorion, chorionic villi, amnion, amniotic cavity, amniotic fluid, umbilical cord, including umbilical artery, umbilical vein, and then with their functions that interchange. And then please remember that you are not allowed to say that umbilical artery, it contains what? Or it transports carbon dioxide. Then you simply have to say that umbilical artery, it carries what? Deoxygenated blood. Umbilical vein, it carries oxygenated blood. It doesn't carry oxygen. Umbilical artery, it doesn't carry carbon dioxide. That is deoxygenated blood. And then again, please remember the functions of the placenta. And then for nutrition and the protection of the placenta, you must not confuse, please, this with the functions of the amniotic cavity and amniotic fluid. And then again, another thing which is very important, guys, it is the definition of what? Of implantation. And then responding to the environment, human nervous system, it will be 54 marks. And then, guys, we are expecting you to get at least above 40, 45 out of these 54 marks. And then remember the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, how the brain is protected. You still remember that it is protected by what? By the meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. So please remember all the labels of the brain and the functions: cerebellum, cerebrum, medulla oblongata, the spinal cord, and what else? Okay, we also have the pituitary gland. And then please remember pons varoli. It is not included on your examination guideline. And then again, you must also be able to answer the damage or injury questions based on this. What will happen if medulla oblongata or cerebellum is damaged? Now we move to peripheral nervous system, location, structure, and functions of different neurons together with their diagrams. Use the term motor neuron as stipulated on your examination guideline. Multipolar neuron, you are no more allowed to use the term multipolar neuron. It was only accepted as a concession for 2021 only. So now, motor neuron, sensory neuron, motor neuron, interneuron or connector neuron. Please know the labels, the diagrams, and the functions on those diagrams. And now we move to autonomic nervous system. Please be able to differentiate between sympathetic and parasympathetic actions of autonomic nervous system. And then you still remember that under endocrine system, we have the hormone adrenaline. So please remember that adrenaline, the functions of the adrenaline, they are still the same with the what? The functioning of the sympathetic reaction of autonomic nervous system. Reflex action, reflex arc, definitions. Reflex action, definition of reflex arc. And then the structure. Know the structure, the labels, the functions of all those neurons. Again. And then after that, the functioning of a reflex action using any example. The significance of reflex action, very important. Significance of a synapse. And then other things which are very important here, the cause and symptoms of the two disorders of the central nervous system. You still remember that I'm talking about Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis. And then now we move to the eye. Please remember the labels of the eye and the functions of all the parts which are stipulated on the examination guideline. And then the functioning of the eye. Remember, we have accommodation and pupillary mechanism. Okay, they are always, these two processes are very important. Banavascolo, they are very important, and then they are always there on your examination papers. And then the visual effects, myopia, which is short-sightedness, long-sightedness, hypermetropia, astigmatism, and cataracts. Okay, they are also very important. And then the ear, labels, all labels that are stipulated on the examination guideline together with their functions. And then the functioning of the ear, you remember that the ear is responsible for what? For hearing and for balance. And then on the process of hearing, please remember that the pinna traps the sound waves. It doesn't trap the sound. If you say that it traps the sound, and then you will get a 0 mark. It traps the sound waves in the outer ear. And then in the middle ear, please remember that we talk about the vibrations. You are not allowed to talk about the sound in the middle ear. Now you have to talk about the vibrations that the ossicle will vibrate. And then in the inner ear, we are now talking about the pressure waves, not the sound or vibrations in the inner ear. And then also under balance, we have the semicircular canal. You still remember that they are responsible for balance. And then the receptor Remember the receptor which is found inside the semicircular canal, it is the cristae, and then inside the circulus and utriculus, we have a receptor called macula or maculae. And then these two receptors, you remember that they are responsible for balance. So please remember that. And then the hearing defects, causes and treatment of the middle ear infection and deafness. Now we are moving to endocrine system and homeostasis. Please remember all the glands which are on your examination guideline. We are talking about hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, and then you remember they secrete insulin and glucagon, not glycogen. Again, glycogen, you still remember that when the blood glucose rises or is very high, and then the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, they secrete insulin. And then this insulin, it will convert this excess glucose into glycogen, which will be stored where? In the liver. Okay? And then as soon as the blood glucose, if it drops, and then again the islets of Langerhans, they will secrete glucagon, which will now convert that glycogen that was stored back into what? Into glucose. And then the level of glucose will be back to normal. And then again we have adrenal glands, adrenaline, they produce adrenaline, and aldosterone. You remember the functioning of aldosterone. It functions where? On that negative feedback mechanism of salt. It regulates the salt content in the blood. And then the ovary, testes, and disorders. Disorders, we have two: diabetes mellitus, not sugar diabetes, man. Diabetes mellitus and goiter. And then negative feedback mechanism, please make sure, do not set your own examination paper. We have 7 negative feedback mechanisms, and you are expected to know all these negative feedback mechanisms. Don't set your question paper and say that, I know that maybe this time the only negative feedback mechanism that will be there, it is the one of thyroxine, or maybe of glucose. Please, like as I have said, don't set your own question paper. Just make sure that you go through all those negative feedback mechanisms. The first one, it is that one of glucose, and then thyroxine, which involves the hormone TSH. Again, and carbon dioxide, water, which is also osmoregulation, and then you still remember that the hormone which is involved here on osmoregulation, it is ADH, and then salt, which has to do with aldosterone. And then again, the negative feedback mechanisms that I have already mentioned, it is that one of progesterone and FSH from human reproduction. Please, it is also important. And then under thermoregulation, you remember that one, these two processes. Okay, let me move to the next. Okay, slide. And then under thermoregulation, the role of the pulse of skin on hot and cold days. So please, again, remember all the events, everything that is taking place during what or which leads to vasodilation and vasoconstriction. When it is hot, what happens when it is hot? You know that the hypothalamus will be stimulated, and then it will send the impulse to the blood vessels, and then after that, the blood vessels, they will dilate or become wider. And then as soon as they dilate or become wider, and then we call that process vasodilation. And then after that, you have to be able to explain the events that will follow after that. And then vasoconstriction again. When it is cold, the blood vessels, they constrict. Please, they don't contract. If you write that they are contracting, you will get a 0 mark. They constrict, and then it leads to vasoconstriction. And then after that, what will happen? Less blood will flow to the skin, and less heat will be lost from the skin. And less blood is sent to the sweat glands. Now we are moving to the last topic. Our last topic, it is the functions of the plant hormones responding to the environment. And then you remember that it is only out of 13 marks. So please remember the functions of all these plant hormones. And then I'm talking about the auxin, gibberellins, and abscisic acid. And then this is very important, the role of auxin in phototropism and the role of geotropism in the role of auxin in geotropism. So remember, guys, that with phototropism, you still remember that we have our plant, and then this plant will be, or the stem, it will be exposed to unilateral light, or light will shine on this plant only on one direction. And then because auxin is sensitive to light, and then now it will move to the darker side. And then the darker side with auxin, it will grow or accelerate more than the brightly lit side. And then that is why you will see the plant bending towards the direction of the light. And then what will happen? Still on phototropism. Now we are having this plant or the stem. But now the plant or the stem, it has been placed on a rotating clinostat. So this simply means that this plant now, it will be exposed to light in all directions, and then it won't bend to any direction, but it will grow straight upward. And then the role of auxin in geotropism, and then just remember that with geotropism, this is what is more important here. Let us say we place our plant horizontally, and then what will happen with auxin? It will move to the lower side. It will move to the lower side, but please remember that auxin in roots, it inhibits growth. Now, the side with no auxin will be the one accelerating or growing. That side or the upper side, it will grow, accelerate faster than the lower side with auxin. And then that is why most of the time you will see the roots bending downward. And then on the very same plant, which has been placed horizontally, and then for geotropism. So please remember that, like as I have said, that auxin will move to the lower side, but on that side of the stem, this lower side, remember that auxin in stem, it accelerates growth. So it means that the lower side on this side, it will grow or accelerate faster, and now our stem will bend upward. So remember such things. Okay, so now this brings us to the end of our presentation. But before I close this presentation, so please, good people, remember that MTN and the Department of Education are running a competition as a way to encourage learners to participate in these presentations or lessons. So I'm going to ask you a question, and then for you to be able to answer this question, you will be required to go to the FS Free State Department of Education Facebook page. So our question is as follows. So this question will be out of 5 marks. A woman is 10 weeks pregnant. Explain why no implantation will occur in the uterus during this time. Okay, let me repeat this. I think I made a mistake. There is something that... Okay, I will repeat this question. A woman is 10 weeks pregnant, and then explain why no other after the first implantation. And then you know that there is no way that we will have the second implantation. So now you have to explain why no other implantation will occur in the uterus during this time. A woman is 10 weeks pregnant, and then explain why no other implantation will occur in the uterus during this time. And then this question, it is only out of 5 marks. It is only out of 5 marks, but I know that you can write 6 points there. So, but we will only get mark 5 marks. And then if you manage, please, guys, just make sure that you go to the FS, Department of Education, Facebook page for you to be able to answer that question. And then there are prizes that will be won. And then the prize are as follows. It is a bucket hat plus a t-shirt. Okay. So thank you so much, guys. And then I just hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. And then please, good luck with your paper 1, Life Sciences examination that you are going to write on this next coming Friday. Thanks.